So the biggest problem that everyone's got is effectively that when you get AI to write things for you or generate content, that it sounds so AI generated, right? It's almost tautological. And you can fix that a little bit with newer models like Claude. But what happens if it becomes successful effectively is that that then becomes the definition of AI generated, right? And so there's no easy way to get around it by just using newer models. So you kind of have to find new ways to do that. One of them has been to use writing styles, right? And I'll show you a way to make that better really, really quickly. So for example, here's just some text from A16 on generative AI. Let's ask ChatGPT and Claude, right, to write me a 3 paragraph article summarizing this on a specific, actually, instead of just saying specific, let's do about ROI enterprise AI using this source, right? And I'm just going to use that there. And I can also just use that again. Yeah, there we go. And I can just use that also in Claude to then kind of very quickly do the same thing for me there. And Opus is going to be better, right? I can almost guarantee you Opus is going to sound better. But both of them are going to start sounding kind of generic. This, if you give this to someone, this either sounds like a mediocre marketing agency or AI, right? Upper end of AI. And if you go to smaller models, which a lot of people are having to for specific purposes, you're going to get that issue, right? Yeah, that's just how it is. Now, I can try to make this less generic. One easy way that people try to do that is by being very, very prescriptive and just put that in there. Okay, be direct, casual, interesting, funny, right? And I can do the same thing with Claude, and it'll also do that. Uh, yeah, so this is somewhat better, but not great, right? And I can try that again, right, with Claude, and I'll still get the same kind of generic output. Now, what I want effectively is to use writing style. So one way that still isn't popular enough is just to directly use writing style. So if I just use, say, for example, my blog as an example, right? I can just come in here and just use something that I've written before that is a lot more, just say that. Um, That's not that bad, but you'll notice that when these guys are trying to be generic, they're also generic in specific ways. And when they're trying to be non-generic and funny, they also sound like some specific blend of internet comedian, which just isn't great. So let's try a new one, right? There we go. And I can just use that and effectively source for writing style. Okay, so let's see how well that is handled. You can do the same thing here with ChatGPT. You can always pause to read these to see what you think, right? Um, okay, that's better. And let's see how well that happens. You can just drop that in there, and then we'll get an idea for how that writing is going to happen. That's a bit better, right? It sounds a little bit more like me. I tend to start with some sort of stronger statements. This is just how I've ended up writing. Sometimes I end with questions. I guess it sort of figured that out. This definitely sounds less generic, right? Definitely sounds less generic. But let's look at a better way to do that, right? And if we look at ChatGPT, worse, right? This is still pretty generic. To me, this doesn't sound like me. I mean, if you read anything I write, you can tell me if this does still sound like me, but let's try and find a better way to do that, right? So let's look at the first thing, right? Let's have a conversation with AI because these days, to do better, they're also good partners in ideation, sort of helping you figure out what works. So I'm just going to recreate some of the things that I've done in the past or some of the things that have helped me, right? So here's, okay, so what are the key parts of a writing style? What makes a long form writer? What are the key notable things in language, structure, tone, etc.? How do you categorize them? I mean, it sounds like I'm writing a book report, but I think it's helpful to do that because you might have an idea, but oftentimes our brains are not exhaustive machines. So much like trying to find names or ideas or different things, it might spark the right word or the right part of your mind or something you already know by just mentioning it to you, right? The same way that if I asked you to list 20 movies that you've seen last, it's going to be very, very hard. But if I keep throwing themes at you, for movies or different topics, and your brain's just going to remember more and more and more. It gives you access, is how I tend to think of, AI driven or AI assisted research. So there we've got a bunch, right? And what we're going to do is just take our sample, and then go on the sample and be definitive. So I'm effectively using the AI to come up with a general structure on what makes writing different. And I may or may not agree with it. In reality, when I'm properly working on this, I will go in and edit and fix and add my own thoughts in. But this is, just meant to demonstrate the pattern, right? And also as AI has gotten bigger, but also very, very young, oftentimes you're looking for patterns on how to solve problems more than the specific way to solve problems, right? Teach a man to fish or learn how to fish, but learn how to learn how to fish. I'm kidding. It's going to be helpful. So, for example, now you've got a bunch of these different things. I'm also now going to add a few more things, right? Okay, let's also build a vocab for this writer. What are his most common? Okay, so here I wish I'd given it a bigger source text, but I'm effectively also trying to build my vocab because something that I noticed the other day is what makes AI writing sometimes generic, what makes, ours different and sometimes is our vocabulary. Our vocabulary is kind of a fingerprint of the path that we take through the world, right? And those things change. What we think is smart is affected by where we went to school, right? What we think is easy to understand is also affected by the people we know and the conversations we've had. So that tends to have that affect, right? That effectively affects what happens. And so if you can pull more of those out and then push them back in prescriptively, right, you get a better result. Not to mention these kind of things also, and this is complete conjecture, have less of an impact on the fact that language models are next token predictors, right? When you give it full sentences, I think they affect the token probabilities and make the model want to kind of talk in a certain way, but not necessarily follow instructions. Hopefully that makes sense, right? Let's use this, right? So now let's try again, right? Just gonna go back and then just open a new tab. There we go. I really just doesn't want to just um, Claude has that issue, right? Let's use XML. I know Claude doesn't necessarily need XML, but whatever. Takes me about the same amount of time to write. Now we're going to paste in our original article. I should stop saying okay. I don't know that that actually helps, but you know, okay, that is hopefully going to be better. I'm mostly just happy we did that. I am also just going to now paste this in to ChatGPT, and we'll also see what we get there. right? There we go. I know, I just have that habit, and for time, I'm not going to go back and correct myself. There we go. That's a lot better. It has all of my weird way of writing, my weird way of being direct early and then adding more things on. Some of these things maybe I wouldn't have said exactly like it, but we are way closer, right? Like, just to me, this feels a lot more like I say nascent a lot. Like, better or worse, I say nascent a lot. So I think if we did a blind test, which I should probably build at some point, but if we did a blind test, I think people that know me would probably think this is closest to how I was speaking than any of the other ones, right? This is also closer. I think Claude is just smarter. I think Claude is smarter in being able to follow these things. Or maybe my prompting style has moved closer to Claude, so the instructions are followed a little bit better. But even then, this is I probably would have written those sentences, right? And the more I can provide it, the more writing style I can provide it, the better, right? Because what's happening effectively here is compression, right? I no longer need to provide, if I just go to a tokenizer, and then I just copy that and just sort of paste that in. That's about 2,000 tokens. Whereas if I copy in my writing style from here, I think it's going to be less. But even if it's not less, I can always just paste in an even bigger, writing style example and get half the size, right? But if I could 10x that, and this would probably only go up by about 10% or 20%. At that point, you get almost like 100x or 10x compression, really. So a lot of benefits here. Just wanted to show that off as something that's become a big part of how I force output in a certain direction. As humans, we value personality, we value individuality. What we hate often is the middle and what sounds generic, right? And this has been a problem that so many people have discussed with me. And this has been my solution to move closer and closer to how to personalize language model output. Of course, fine tuning and other things are really going to come in handy there in terms of style changes. But this is a great way to get started. Hopefully, that was helpful.